Tonight on Newshour, President Trump has disbanded a White House group that had been exploring ways to pressure Russia into peace talks with Ukraine. The working group, formed earlier this year by Trump's own National Security Council, was tasked with examining diplomatic, economic and military levers that might shift Moscow's calculus. But now the administration says the initiative is no longer aligned with its strategic goals. Officials have described the effort as unproductive and argue it risked complicating broader diplomatic engagements. The group's closure comes just months after it was quietly launched and amid growing questions over the direction of US foreign policy in the second Trump term. For some, this is a calculated reset, reflecting new thinking in Washington about America's role in the conflict. But others see it as a troubling retreat, potentially undermining Ukraine's leverage at a critical juncture. The G7, with a strong Canadian front, has asserted their support for Ukraine regardless. Let's take a look at this report.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Canada on Tuesday to urge the Group of Seven to provide more backing for the war against Russia. But while Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney announced new aid for Ukraine,
we are providing additional military assistance, drones, helicopters, broader munitions, over $2 billion worth of assistance.
The host country dropped plans for the G7 to issue a strong statement on the war in Ukraine after resistance from the United States, a Canadian official told reporters. Trump expressed support for Russian President Vladimir Putin and has imposed tariffs on many of the allies present. Carney said when G7 leaders met for dinner on Monday before Trump left, they stressed the importance of using, quote, maximum pressure against Russia to force it to start serious peace talks. A European official said leaders had stressed to Trump their plans to be hard on Russia, and Trump seemed impressed, though he does not like sanctions in principle. A Russian attack overnight on Kyiv and other cities killed more than a dozen people, including one American, according to the U.S. State Department.
We are ready for the peace negotiations, unconditional ceasefire. I think it's very important, but for this we need pressure.
Canada is one of Ukraine's most vocal defenders, but its ability to help Kyiv is far outweighed by the United States, the largest arms supplier. Zelensky had said he hoped to talk to Trump about acquiring more weapons.
Okay, now let's get some insight from our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jagruti Dave, on what led to this reversal from the Trump administration. Jagruti, good to see you. What more do we know then about the origins of this group and why it was created? And has an explanation yet been given as to why it was shut down?
Well, Guy, this working group was set up earlier this year, around March-April, to try to speed up the peace talks to end the war in Ukraine. Reuters says this is the first time the very existence of this group is being reported. The three sources speaking to the news agency say the group was being managed by top members of the White House's National Security Council, with other agencies taking part, including the Pentagon. Now, the US officials talking to Reuters suggested several factors which put the nail in the coffin for the group. One of those was the removal of key players in the National Security Council. That includes Andrew Peake, the senior NSC official for Europe and Russia. These officials also said that by May, it was becoming apparent that Donald Trump was not interested in putting pressure on Russia in the same way as his predecessor, Joe Biden, and the US's allies in Europe. The US president, however, has still said he could get tough on Russia if there isn't a peace deal. For example, he suggested more sanctions. But the disbanding of this group is likely to worry the Europeans. US officials, including the White House, haven't commented on this report, and Reuters says it's unclear whether or not Donald Trump even knows about the group or the fact that it's no longer operational.
Joining me now is Andrei Ordinovich, a retired colonel from the Armed Forces of Ukraine in Kyiv. Colonel, thank you very much indeed for joining us on NewsHour. Give us your insight then on this. How has this decision by the US been received by the military leadership in Ukraine?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this program. Yes, it is slightly concerning information which came from the Washington, D.C. However, our political and particularly military leadership are remaining resolute. They are trying to be solid on the military campaign and trying to repeal Russian aggression. Second one, for sure, the dissolution of this group, some creating inconsistent stance of United States and give some kind of worry to the military personnel. First of all, it could have some kind of indirect as well as direct effect on the planning, making complication of the execution military campaign. It could undermine to some extent the morale of the military personnel. But more important, it's also undermining the long-term defense strategy. However, we would, in any case, to fight, because this genocidal, I would say, and existential war, what Russia are doing against Ukraine, we would not have any other possibility as fight, and leaders, civilian and military, are aware of it. We are gonna fight. Only probably from the disbanded, this group would have some application on different domains. And diplomatical one related to the negotiation, as well as military one and economical one, specifically from US side. But I believe it, the portfolio of this group right now are spread among other experts within State Department and Pentagon to have the US presence in the overall negotiation and mitigation process of reducing the level of effect of this war of aggression against Ukraine.
And Colonel, do you expect that it will have any practical impact on the day-to-day military prosecution of the war, the day-to-day strategy? Will this change anything tactically?
As for now, we'll see. Probably it is already has some initial effect, because Russians, since the beginning of June, started to intensify their offensive action on the Sumy direction, on the Pokrovsk direction. As you know, on 2 days ago, we had the biggest attack on the capital with the combined attacks with the missiles, with the Shaheds, and different type of missile. Second, it also could have, if US would not follow their obligation based on Budapest Memorandum, based on previous administration decision to supply with security assistance, we could face, honestly, some kind of ammunition stockpile shortage. We could face some missiles for the air defense, specifically for against ballistic and aero-ballistic missiles. We also could have some short or maybe not effective supply like ICR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And also this kind of decision could push more focus on European countries to help. And I guess this kind of shift is going on right now.
That's very interesting. And in terms of your assessment of President Trump and the US's support for Ukraine, I mean, we've watched the ongoing roller coaster of the relationship between Presidents Zelensky and Trump. What's your evaluation of the current state of the US view, the US perspective on its ongoing support for Ukraine?
As I understood, we are monitoring the slightly shifting foreign policy, overall foreign policy of United States toward the numbers of the security issue around the globe. As we do understand that they would like to shift, Trump administration would like to shift their main efforts towards the Indo-Pacific and trying somehow to engage and make the better condition for the negotiation with Russia. But this kind of stance are not giving leverage for the US administration to implement their strategy, peace throughout the strengths. Strengths mean to be better coordinated, to be better engaged, to gain all stakeholders specifically on the field of security defense in order to mitigate any kind of security risk. Right now, the situation is very much fragile in diplomatical domains, or do have slightly negative diplomatical implication. But at the same time, the European Union and NATO has to step forward, what they are doing slowly but steadily, and replace some US efforts in this negotiation process with the Russians, as well as helping Ukrainian military to give more strength on the battlefield.
And just on that, Colonel, from what you've seen so far in response to this news about the closing down of this group in the US, are you satisfied with the response from the EU, from NATO, from the other Western powers, or are you hoping for more support, more of a reaction that may come in the coming days and weeks?
For me, it is very difficult to say because each nation within EU and NATO has own national interest. But the strengths of great power in Europe, like from Germany, France, Poland, UK, are very strong on the sending message regarding the support of Ukraine. For sure, from NATO and EU, we expect more visible, more decisive, and more coordinated efforts based on the, let's say, field demands, what we needed, if we will need it, because the numbers of Western platforms which have been supply Ukrainian military to some extent could go out, and without kind of strong coordinated support, it would be very difficult for us to keep a high-level efficiency of fight. First of all, we need to better coordination of delivery security assistance. Second one, we have to probably reinforce intelligence exchange, specifically in different domains, which could help Ukraine to do better precision guiding strike on Russian territory or on the temporary occupied territory. But also we are looking for the long-term security guarantee. And one of it could be better even returning to the posture of 2014-2015, when the presence of some foreign troops, specifically from NATO countries and EU on Ukrainian soil, being treated as a strategic deterrence to improve our air defense in different domains, helping us, which as for now, US are trying to help Israeli colleagues to fight the ballistic missiles. We also could have, based on the political commitment of Western power, such kind of engagement in Ukraine. Because again, we are fighting against genocidal and existential war. And such political commitment and strength of Europeans and NATO could help us to prevail and sustain the peace just and lasting one.
Colonel Aldanovich, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Kyiv. Thank you very much. And now
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Now let's get the Russian perspective. My next guest is Andrei Teleshenko, a political analyst who's joining us from Basel in Switzerland. Mr. Teleshenko, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Keen to get your reaction to the news in the US, also perhaps on what we've just heard. What is your evaluation of this shift we've seen in Washington's diplomatic approach?
Thank you for having me on the show again. This is right now in Washington. There was no plan from the beginning on how to solve the Ukrainian crisis and conflict with Russia. So right now they're trying to regroup and then right now understand after the talks with the Russian Federation and Trump with Putin over the phone and the delegations meeting in Saudi Arabia, that there's an understanding that you cannot pressure Russia. The United States, understanding their own possibilities right now, economical, which are on the verge of default because of their loan and gold reserves and issues within the Middle East, there's an understanding there needs to be a shift in the coordination and work with the Russian Federation, not from pressure points, but with diplomatically coordinated and peace talks directly. And I think that is the first step, and it's a positive step towards peace. And that's one thing. And second of all, the only thing that United States can pressure today is the Kyiv regime, which it basically finances still, and let them go for peace negotiations and peace deals, because this war could have never started if it never happened in the civil war in Donbass and Kyiv shelling the people in Donbass 2014, and then what happened in Istanbul 2022 when Kyiv regime basically denounced the peace negotiations that could have saved Ukraine, and Minsk, which could get Donbass back. Kyiv had so much opportunities within the last 10 years to get this war not into the full verge, that the only thing should be pressured is right now Zelensky and his regime. Moscow talked about peace negotiations for the last 10 years. Unfortunately, the Biden administration did want peace. That's why this war is happening today. They basically lured Ukraine into believing they're going to join NATO. And the Trump administration coming to power wants peace. President Trump wants peace. And there's an understanding that there needs to be not pressure points on Moscow, but talks and negotiations.
Do you think such a thing as a task force, a group, is actually needed? Or are the normal diplomatic mechanisms enough?
Right now, there's no full coordinated work on the diplomatic level with the Russian Federation. There is embassies, there's ambassadors. Thank God there's a new ambassador in Moscow, in Washington. There'll be a new ambassador in Moscow soon. And a full coordinated and rebooting of this work needs to start. The problem is the White House and the President of the United States is a great businessman, but he doesn't see foreign relations and foreign policy as his number one priority or understanding. So there needs to be an advisory group within his office to coordinate the work on the peace process. Yes, State Department has its own roots. Right now there's doing a reform process within that area where Marco Rubio is hopefully going to do a great job in that, including the House in the State Department. But right now, from what we saw in Trump's first term, Trump needs people loyal to his beliefs and in his policy that are around him. And a group like this is a good step forward in trying to filter and buffer out whatever is the deep state, which is still in Washington in the swamp, is trying to lure the new administration from peace to war and to warmongering. So hopefully a new group will be formed, and a group not from pressure points, as I said, but from peace, diplomacy, and negotiations.
A new group to be formed. Very interesting. And then in response to this move by the US, and right now, give us a sense of the mind of President Putin at the moment, where the Kremlin is at the moment in relation to Ukraine and in relation to the US.
I cannot speak for President Putin or for President Trump. I can only analyze and understand what both are and the verge are talking about. First of all, Russia acts and was acting in the last 10 years with a stable political move on negotiations on Ukraine. Even though after the coup happened in Ukraine, the first one in 2004, Russia still worked in coordinated work with Ukraine. They obliged all the international procedures. But what happened the second coup in 2014 with the glorification of the Nazism and radicalization of Kyiv happened, Russia moved its stance on with the national security much more forward and basically took back Crimea and protected the people of Crimea. Because what we saw then happen in the people of Donbass who came out and said they don't want to agree with Kyiv and their radical aggression towards the Russian language and towards the Russian church, the full basically torture and destruction of Donbass by the Kyiv regime, that's the result if Russia would protect Crimea, would happen the same thing there. So even then, it moved forward stably with the Minsk Accords, Minsk I, Minsk II, and Kyiv and the West moved back all the way. They didn't confirm, they didn't confront and move forward with the peace negotiations. They only said we will move forward, but never did anything in that accord. So it led to this conflict and escalation of this conflict today. And even today, Russia still really talks about peace. In Istanbul, 2022 in Istanbul now, with the new administration in Washington, Putin asked about peace negotiation last year when he talked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, when he announced the same that they're ready to come back and sit down in Istanbul to talk with Kyiv. Kyiv never made a move. Now Kyiv is making a move because there's a new administration, a new leader in the United States who actually wants peace and doesn't support this war or Kyiv regime's war in the area. So that's why they're moving this. Kyiv was trying to show a picture to the West, but at the same time trying to undermine these peace negotiations with Europe's warmongering processes to continue this war at any cost and do provocations and escalations within this whole process. Every time Russia talked about peace, Kyiv escalated with processes that happened within drone attacks on Russia, when Russia talked about peace for 2-3 days during the May parade and the May celebrations. Still, Kyiv escalated. Russia spoke about peace negotiations during the Easter process, Easter holidays. Kyiv again escalated with drone attacks on the Russian territory, on civilian targets, not military targets, civilian targets. And it went forward and forward. So there's a stable Russia position on peace. Let's bring this to the end. We don't want to continue this war. It costs a lot of bodies. People are dying. Ukraine lost over 1 million soldiers right now. Russia's losing soldiers. It costs a lot of money also. Let's just stop this and get to peace. But no, Kyiv said we want to join NATO. We want to escalate this war. We will not step back, even though Kyiv has no equipment, as we just heard our guest previously. They're asking and begging for ammunition, equipment, because Kyiv has nothing. If you have nothing to fight with, you have no economy. Ukraine is also in default mode by foreign organizations. Then you don't fight a war. You stop and bring peace to your people and stop them from suffering. So that's what, as I said, I hope Russia will continue this peace narrative. And I hope that President Trump will also continue this peace narrative and form something new within his administration that will bring a close relationship with Russia and the United States back on track. And that will lead to peace within Ukraine. And as I said, once again, adding to the group that was reformed in the White House, we see the Middle East conflict happening right now. Representative Witkoff is from Trump's representative Witkoff is also negotiating peace with Iran. So his role is stable there. So there needs to be also a reform with the new group to have maybe new figures involved who can negotiate the peace deal with Russia and the United States and on Ukraine.
Okay, well, calls for peace, a very good point to end our discussion. Mr. Selezhenko, thank you very much indeed for your comprehensive analysis. Thanks very much.
Thank you. God bless.
Okay, that does bring us to the end of tonight's edition of NewsHour, as the Trump administration then recalibrates its approach to Russia and Ukraine. The world watches for signs of either renewed diplomacy or deepening divides. Well, we'll continue to track the fallout and reaction in Washington, Moscow and beyond. From all of us here at AnewZ, thanks for being with us.